Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Blue. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Harry found a goblin legal scroll in the attic and sued Dumbledore for every stolen Potter asset? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Scroll in the Dark. The attic smelled like old cardboard and forgotten things. Harry had been up there for 20 minutes, nominally looking for a broken fan his uncle had decided needed finding at 11:30 at night, but mostly just grateful for the excuse to be somewhere Vernon Dursley wasn't. The single bare bulb overhead threw everything into sharp amber shadow, and the heat up here was a living thing, pressing against his skin like a damp cloth. July in Little Whinging was always miserable. July in the attic of number 4 was something close to purgatory. He moved boxes aside without really looking at them. Dudley's old toys, stacked in towers, a plastic castle with a broken drawbridge, a remote-controlled car with no remote, a xylophone missing 3 bars. His aunt's old dress boxes, wrapped in plastic that had gone yellow. A tennis racket with 2 strings left. The accumulated debris of a family that kept everything except what mattered. Harry's foot caught on something and he nearly went over, catching himself on a low beam and swearing under his breath. He looked down. Half hidden under a split cardboard box and a rolled-up mat was a trunk. Not a moving box, not a piece of Dudley's junk pile. An actual trunk, dark leather gone almost black with age, bound in metal clasps that had oxidized to a deep greenish bronze. The initials on the front had mostly faded, but Harry crouched down and pushed the mat aside and felt something cold move through his chest. L.E.P. Lily Evans Potter. He sat back on his heels and just looked at it for a moment. The attic noise settled, the creak of the house, the distant sound of the television downstairs, a car somewhere outside. He'd never seen this trunk before. He'd lived in this house for 14 years, minus the school terms, and he had never once come across anything of his mother's. He'd assumed there was nothing. He'd stopped assuming that kind of thing after the mirror of Eriste had shown him what wanting looked like, but the assumption had stayed in his bones anyway, quiet and dull. He reached for the clasps. The first one resisted, then gave with a sound like a small snap. The second was fused solid with age. The third opened easily, like it had been oiled yesterday. The lid came up stiff at first, then suddenly smooth, as if something inside had decided to cooperate. The trunk smelled like her. Harry had no memory of what his mother smelled like, no sense of her at all except in photographs where she always seemed to be on the verge of laughing. But the smell that came up out of that trunk, clean and slightly floral and undercut with something chemical, like a potion lab, felt impossibly, irrationally familiar. He didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Inside were 2 robes, folded. A pair of dragon hide gloves, small. A stack of books on charms theory, the spines cracked with use. A compact mirror with a hairline fracture across the lower corner. At the very bottom, wedged against the side and wrapped in what looked like an ordinary dishcloth, was a cylinder about the length of Harry's forearm, sealed at both ends with dark wax. He picked it up. The wax had that dull, almost metallic quality of something charmed. He'd seen it on official Hogwarts correspondence, on ministry documents. He turned it over. Pressed into the wax at one end was an impression he didn't immediately recognize, a shield with something that might have been a goblin's profile in the center, surrounded by what looked like angular script that hurt to focus on. At the other end, in his mother's handwriting, he recognized it from the single letter he'd ever seen from her, the one Hagrid had given him in first year, were 4 words. For Harry. Blood only. His hand was steady when he broke the seal. He wasn't sure why. His heart was doing something loud and complicated in his chest, but his hands were perfectly, almost unnaturally calm. The cylinder split at the middle and unrolled into a scroll roughly half a meter long, and the moment the outer edge touched the pad of his right thumb, the thumb that had a small, faint scar from a potions accident in second year, the one that had bled quite a lot at the time, the scroll blazed. Not with fire. With light that came from inside the parchment itself, gold and sharp as a struck match. The text, which had been invisible a moment ago, appeared in 2 simultaneous scripts, an angular goblin language running down the left column, and English running down the right. Harry had just enough time to register the words Gringotts Bank, Official Registry of Assets, Potter Family, Legal Instrument Class 7 before the light flared once, bright enough to cast hard shadows across the attic, and went out. And something knocked on the front door. Not a polite knock. A series of 3 precise, heavy impacts that sounded like a fist accustomed to being heard through stone walls. Harry looked down at the scroll, up at the dark attic around him, and then at the stairs. The knock came again. 3 beats. Waiting. Downstairs, he heard his uncle's outraged bellow, the crash of something being knocked over, heavy footsteps. Harry rolled the scroll quickly, tucked it under his arm, and moved to the attic steps. By the time he reached the second-floor landing, Vernon was already at the front door in his dressing gown, face puce, yanking it open with the clear intention of delivering a speech. The speech died. Harry came down the stairs and looked over his uncle's shoulder and felt his eyebrows rise. The goblin on the doorstep was young, or at least younger-looking than the ones Harry remembered from his one visit to Gringotts, before first year, before everything. He came roughly to Vernon's chest in height, wore a dark suit of extraordinary precision, and carried a leather satchel that seemed to be humming faintly. His eyes were the color of old amber and they moved from Vernon to Harry with the efficiency of something that had already assessed everything it needed to know. "Harry James Potter," the goblin said. "Not a question. I am Griphook the Younger, licensed legal courier for Gringotts Bank. Your mother's scroll has been activated. I am required to accompany it to Gringotts within the hour." A brief pause. "You'll want to pack a bag." Vernon made a sound like a boiler reaching critical pressure. "Now you look here, whatever you are, it's midnight and this is a respectable, sir," Griphook said, and his tone had a quality to it that made Vernon actually stop, the way a very small but very confident predator can stop something much larger. "I am not speaking to you. I am speaking to Lord Potter. You are a tangential circumstance." The words Lord Potter landed in the hallway like something solid. Vernon blinked. Harry stood very still on the stairs, the scroll tucked against his side, and looked at Griphook with an expression that was several complicated emotions stacked on top of each other. "Give me 5 minutes," Harry said. He was back in 4. He'd grabbed his wand, his money pouch, a change of clothes, his invisibility cloak on instinct, and Hedwig's empty cage was a pang he pushed aside. Hedwig was at the Weasleys, she was fine. Vernon hadn't moved from the doorway, which meant he was still processing. Petunia had appeared at the top of the stairs in her housecoat, her face doing something complicated and difficult to read. She and Harry looked at each other for a moment. "My mother's trunk," Harry said. "It's in the attic. The one with her initials. I'd like it sent to Gringotts." Petunia's mouth opened. Closed. Something moved across her face, a flicker of something raw and quickly buried, the way someone looks when they hear a name they've tried for years to stop meaning something. "We didn't know it was." "Yes you did," Harry said, without particular heat. "Just as a fact. Please have it sent." He walked past his uncle and out the front door, and Griphook fell into step beside him on the dark pavement like this was entirely ordinary. "The trunk will be collected," Griphook said, producing a small card from somewhere in his jacket and placing it on the doorstep without breaking stride. "Gringotts retrieval. They'll have it within the hour." He glanced up at Harry with those amber eyes. "You've read none of the scroll." "I just found it. It glowed and then you knocked on the door." "Efficient activation." Griphook sounded almost approving. "Your mother designed it carefully. The bloodlock required a natural contact, she didn't want it triggered by accident, only by choice." A brief pause. "You chose to open it." "I didn't know what it was." "You knew it was hers and you opened it anyway." Griphook said it like it settled something. "That is choice enough." At the end of Privet Drive, where the street lamps gave out, a Gringotts carriage was waiting. It was black and low-slung, pulled by 2 horses that were too dark and too quiet to be entirely ordinary, and the driver was another goblin who didn't speak at all. Harry got in. The inside smelled like polished wood and the particular ozone sharpness of strong enchantments. The carriage moved before Harry had fully settled, pulling away from Little Whinging with a smooth, deliberate velocity that suggested the horses did not particularly care about traffic laws. Harry unrolled the scroll in the carriage lamplight and started reading. He read for 40 minutes straight. He didn't say anything for most of it. His face did a number of things, went still, then tight around the eyes, then loose in a way that might have been the early stages of shock, then hard in a way it hadn't been before. Griphook sat across from him and watched without offering commentary, which Harry was privately grateful for, because he was not at all sure he could have maintained any kind of dignity if someone had been saying "I know, it's terrible" while he was reading. The Potter family assets were not, as Harry had vaguely assumed, simply a vault of gold his parents had left behind. They were a financial architecture built across generations. The Potter Vault, Vault 687, which Harry had visited in first year, was the family's liquid assets account, essentially a household allowance in the context of the whole. The main Potter Vault, designated Vault 3, was something he'd never been told existed. It held the accumulated wealth of the Potter family going back 4 centuries, gold, yes, but also shares in 11 major wizarding companies, 3 properties in addition to Godric's Hollow, an estate in Wiltshire called Potter's Ridge, a townhouse in Edinburgh, and a hunting property in the Scottish Highlands that hadn't been occupied since 1985. The Potter family also held a hereditary seat on the Wizengamot. The Lord Seat of House Potter, ancient and noble designation, granted under the Magical Families Act of 1313. That seat had sat empty or been voted by proxy since the death of James Potter in 1981. There were heirlooms catalogued in the appendix, a sword, 3 wands of ancestral significance, several books of the restricted variety, a collection of magical artifacts including something called the Potter Astrolabe whose description Harry had to read 3 times before he decided he still didn't understand it. There was a family library, boxed and vaulted after the death of his grandparents, that contained an estimated 400 irreplaceable texts. And then there was the note at the bottom of the second-to-last page, in Goblin script with an English annotation in a different hand, smaller, more hurried, written in the margins like someone had added it at the last possible moment. Power of attorney over the Potter estate, all accounts and subsidiaries, claimed via instrument of emergency guardianship following the deaths of James and Lily Potter, November 1, 1981. Claimant, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry stared at that paragraph for a long time. The carriage moved through the dark countryside. Somewhere outside, England slept. Harry turned to the last page of the scroll, the page he'd been leaving, the one his mother had written by hand, not in the formal register language of the rest of the document but in the quick, slanted script he recognized from her letter to Sirius. The one he kept in a drawer at school. Harry, if you're reading this, it means 2 things: you're old enough to have found it on your own, and I didn't survive to give it to you myself. I'm writing this on a Tuesday in October, 1981. James thinks I'm writing a letter to my sister. I probably should be, but I'm not. I want you to know what belongs to you. Not because money matters, it doesn't, not particularly, but because knowing what is yours means knowing what can be taken from you, and I want you to be someone who notices the difference. Your father's family built something real across generations. You should have the chance to decide what to do with it. I also want you to know that I made Gringotts your legal executor in the event of my death, not the ministry and not anyone in the order. Goblins are many things, and not all of them comfortable, but they keep their contracts. I have paid for that contract in full. If you activate this scroll, Gringotts is obligated to act as your legal champion. They will do so because it is profitable and because Goblin law requires it, that is more reliable than goodwill. If anyone has been managing your estate without your knowledge or consent, this scroll is the instrument to address that. The goblins will know what to do. I don't know what the world looks like when you read this. I don't know what you've been told or not told or what you've had to be without. I hope you're all right. I hope you're better than all right. I hope someone has been kind to you. You are so loved. You were so wanted. None of what happens next is the cost of that, it's just the world being complicated and dangerous, which it has always been. Go sort it out. Love, Mum. The carriage came to a stop. Harry sat with the scroll in his hands for a moment longer. Then he rolled it carefully, tucked it back inside his jacket, and looked at Griphook. The power of attorney document, he said. Did Gringotts know about it? Griphook's expression was measured. Gringotts was notified of it in November 1981. The document was filed as an emergency instrument and accepted under protest by the then director, who noted several procedural irregularities but was overruled by the ministry liaison at the time. Accepted under protest, Harry repeated. But accepted. Your mother's scroll supersedes it, Griphook said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite satisfaction but was adjacent to it. The Class 7 legal instrument was filed before the power of attorney. In Goblin law, it takes absolute precedence. Dumbledore's authority over your estate has been void since the moment your blood touched that parchment. He paused. Legally, it was void before that. Gringotts has been waiting for the activation. For how long? 14 years, 3 months, and 11 days. They were parked in the shadow of a narrow London street that Harry didn't recognize, but ahead of them the familiar marble face of Gringotts rose white and gleaming against the dark sky, all its torches lit, its massive doors standing open. Which was strange, because Gringotts had never been open at. Harry looked up at the sky, what must be 2 or 2:30 in the morning. The bank operates continuously, Griphook said, reading his expression. We simply don't advertise it. Wizards sleep at predictable hours. It is one of their more useful qualities. He climbed out of the carriage and held the door. Director Ragnok is waiting. He has been waiting since the scroll activated. Harry got out and stood on the London pavement looking up at the bank, and thought about 14 years and a vault he'd never known existed and a Wizengamot seat that had been casting proxy votes without him and a letter his mother had written on a Tuesday in October when she was 21 years old because she had looked at the world and decided to be prepared. He thought about the way Dumbledore always looked at him, fond, careful, regretful in a way Harry had always interpreted as grief but was suddenly rearranging itself into something that looked, in this new light, uncomfortably like management. He thought about the way he'd been hungry, and small, and kept deliberately ignorant for so many years that ignorance had started to feel like his natural state. He walked up the steps of Gringotts at 2 in the morning and the doors opened ahead of him before he'd reached the top step, and the 2 goblin guards at the entrance inclined their heads, not a bow, not quite, but something with weight to it, something acknowledging, and Harry walked through. The interior of Gringotts at night was nothing like the daytime bank he remembered from first year. The high vaulted ceiling still glittered with its enchanted lights, but they burned lower now, a warm deep gold that turned the marble floors amber. The long teller counters were staffed but quiet, a dozen goblins working in focused silence on ledgers and documents. The enormous chandeliers threw slow, elaborate shadows. The whole place had the feeling of a machine that never stopped, only got quieter when the humans weren't watching. A goblin in a dark red coat approached from across the hall. He was old, not Griphook old but genuinely ancient, with deep-set eyes the color of polished obsidian and the kind of stillness that belongs to things that have been powerful for a very long time and stopped needing to demonstrate it. Lord Potter, said Director Ragnok. His voice was low and precise and carried without effort across the marble hall. Welcome to Gringotts. Sit down. We have a considerable amount to discuss. He turned and walked without looking back, and Harry followed, and Griphook fell into step behind them, and the torches threw their shadows long across the ancient floor. The conference room Ragnok led him to was nothing like the public areas of the bank. It was small and warm, paneled in something dark that might have been black walnut, with a long table at its center currently covered in documents, ledgers, and rolls of parchment. Several other goblins were already present, seated around the table with the focused energy of people who had been working for hours. They looked up as Harry entered. No one spoke. Ragnok took the head of the table. Harry took the seat indicated, across from Ragnok, at the table's center. He put the scroll on the table. You've read it, Ragnok said. Most of it. Then you know the basic shape of your holdings. Ragnok opened a ledger without preamble. I will tell you the complete shape. You will likely find parts of it distressing. I suggest you be distressed later, as there is a significant amount of information to process and we will be here until dawn regardless. Harry almost smiled. All right. The Potter estate, at the time of your parents' deaths, was worth approximately 14 million galleons in liquid assets, with additional holdings that would conservatively value the whole at 30 to 40 million. This was not a small fortune. The Potters were an old family with old money and a history of intelligent investment. Ragnok turned a page. The liquid assets in Vault 687, your vault, the one you visited in your first year, represent approximately 160,000 galleons, current balance. Harry stared. That's a lot less than, yes. Ragnok looked at him steadily. Vault 687 was what was given to you. Vault 3, the main Potter vault, has been under the management of the Power of Attorney since 1981. We have detailed records of its movement. He paused, and the pause had texture to it. 43 withdrawals in 14 years. Total removed, approximately 9,200,000 galleons. The room was very quiet. Who to? Harry asked. His voice came out perfectly even, which surprised him. Ragnok's expression didn't change. Several recipients. The largest disbursements, 4,700,000 over the course of 14 years, went to a private trust account registered under the name of the Order of the Phoenix. Smaller amounts went to individual recipients, some of whom you will recognize. He closed the ledger. The Weasley family received 1,200 galleons in 1992, disbursed as an anonymous educational grant. They have received 3 additional payments since, all anonymous, all from the Potter estate. Harry's jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed. He filed that away. There's more, Ragnok continued. The Wizengamot seat. House Potter holds the seat of the third chair under the ancient and noble designation. In your absence, or rather, in the absence of your knowledge, that seat has been voted by designated proxy. Whose proxy? Albus Dumbledore's. As Power of Attorney, he designated himself proxy voter for the Potter seat in 1982 and has held it uncontested since. Ragnok folded his hands on the table. He has cast 41 proxy votes in your name over 14 years. 7 of those votes directly benefited his own legislative agenda. 3 of them were on bills that would have affected your personal legal status had they passed. One of the other goblins at the table, a younger one with sharp eyes and a stack of documents in front of her, spoke for the first time. The most significant was the Underage Magic Restriction Amendment of 1994. The Potter proxy voted in favor. The bill passed by 2 votes. She held Harry's gaze. It is the bill under which you received your current ministry warning for underage magic use this summer. The silence in the room was different now. It had a kind of crystalline quality, like the moment before something breaks. Harry sat back in his chair. He thought about the owl he'd received after the Dementor attack. You have received an official warning for the use of underage magic. He thought about the hearing he'd been told to expect in August, the one Dumbledore had told him he'd help sort out. He thought about how Dumbledore had framed it as an unfortunate complication he was graciously working to resolve. He voted to make the law that he's now offering to rescue me from, Harry said. Ragnok nodded once. Using my own proxy vote. Yes. Harry looked down at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. What do I need to do to file a claim? Something moved in Ragnok's obsidian eyes, not quite pleasure, but recognition. The kind of expression a chess player has when their opponent makes the move they'd been waiting for. You need to authorize Gringotts as your legal champion under the Class 7 instrument, which your mother already established and which I require only your spoken confirmation to activate. You need to formally claim your Wizengamot seat, which requires a visit to the Ministry's hereditary registry. I recommend we do that today, before they open officially, as we have a contact who can process the paperwork at dawn." He paused. "And you will need people." "I have people." "You have 2 school friends, as far as I am aware." "One of them is the brightest person I know," Harry said, "and the other one's family is apparently on the receiving end of Potter money, which means he has a very personal reason to want this resolved transparently." He looked at Ragnok. "Can I send owls from here?" Ragnok gestured to the young female goblin, who produced 2 pieces of parchment and a quill from somewhere without being asked. Harry wrote to Hermione first. He kept it brief, found something significant, "At Gringotts, please come as soon as you can, it's important," and then sat for a moment before writing to Ron. That one was harder. He wrote it twice and the second version was more honest. "Something's come up with my family's finances, your family is involved in a peripheral way, I need you to hear it from me and not from anyone else." He sealed them both and the young goblin took them and left the room. "They will be delivered within the hour," Ragnok said. "Gringotts maintains a courier service independent of the Ministry Owl network." A brief pause. "It is faster and considerably more private." "Right." Harry turned back to the table. "Walk me through the properties." They were still talking when the first grey light of dawn came through the high, narrow window above the door. By then Harry had a working understanding of every Potter asset, a list of every withdrawal from Vault 3 with dates and amounts, a copy of the power of attorney document, which was, Ragnok noted with the careful neutrality of someone choosing not to say the word forged, procedurally anomalous in several significant respects, and a drafted version of the formal Gringotts legal claim that needed only his signature. He also had, in a leather folio set at his left elbow, the contents of a sealed subcompartment of the scroll that he hadn't found on his own. A document in Goblin script that Ragnok had translated, a list of additional Potter holdings that Lily had discovered were at risk and had specifically documented in anticipation of exactly this scenario. Including, at the bottom, a single line that Ragnok had translated with the same careful neutrality he used for everything. Potter family correspondence, letters of political alliance, and 1 copy of the last will and testament of James and Lily Potter, deposited Vault 3, October 29, 1981. 2 days before their deaths. "There's a will," Harry said. "There is. And Dumbledore has, the will names Sirius Black as your primary guardian." Ragnok watched Harry carefully. "It also names Frank and Alice Longbottom as secondary guardians in the event of Sirius's incapacitation, and specifically and explicitly excludes the Dursley family." He let that sit for a moment. The will was never formally read. It was never entered into the Ministry's estate registry. It was, as far as the Ministry's official records are concerned, misfiled. The neutrality in his voice was doing a great deal of work. "In the vault, it remains valid. Under Goblin law, its contents cannot be denied." Harry stared at the wall for a moment. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about years of wearing Dudley's hand-me-downs and not asking questions and being told he was lucky to be fed. He thought about Sirius in Azkaban for 12 years while a will sat in a vault a mile under London, naming him guardian. He picked up the quill. He signed the formal Gringotts legal claim with a hand that was, again, perfectly steady. "Send the notice to the Wizengamot," he said. "And send one to Dumbledore." He set the quill down. "Personal delivery. I want him to get it before anyone else can warn him." Ragnok nodded and handed the signed document to the goblin on his right without looking away from Harry. "It will be delivered at 8 a.m. He looked, for just a moment, like something that had been patient for a very long time and had just heard a clock strike. "Welcome to Gringotts, Lord Potter. We look forward to representing your interests." The door opened. Griphook appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Granger and Miss Granger have arrived," he said. "And the Weasley boy. They are in the reception hall. The girl looks as though she has read 5 books in the last hour. The boy looks as if he was asleep until 15 minutes ago." Harry stood up from the table, gathered the folio, and straightened his jacket. Outside the narrow window, London was turning pale gold with the first real light of morning. "That sounds about right," he said. "I'll go meet them." He walked out of the conference room and down the corridor toward the reception hall, the scroll in his hand, the folio under his arm, the signed legal claim already in motion across the city like a stone thrown at still water, and the rings of it spreading and spreading and spreading. Chapter 2, The Weight of Gold and Ink. Hermione Granger arrived at Gringotts looking like she'd dressed in the dark, which she had, and like she'd spent the carriage ride reading, which was also true because Griphook the Younger had handed her a summary document the moment she'd stepped outside her parents' house in a dressing gown and a look of controlled alarm. By the time she walked through the bank's doors at 5:30 in the morning, she had read the summary twice, annotated it mentally, and was operating somewhere between horrified and the specific kind of electric focus that came over her when a problem was both serious and solvable. Ron was behind her looking like a man who had been informed of a house fire while still technically asleep. His hair was doing 3 different things. He had his wand and one shoe on the wrong foot and had only noticed halfway up the Gringotts steps, correcting it with the careful dignity of someone pretending that hadn't happened. Harry was waiting for them in the reception hall, standing near one of the amber-lit pillars with a leather folio under his arm and an expression Ron had never quite seen on him before. Not distressed. Not angry, exactly. More like someone who had spent the night rearranging their understanding of the world and had finished the job and was now standing in the result. "Harry," Hermione said, and then stopped, because she had 12 questions and couldn't decide which one was first. "I know," Harry said. "Come on. I'll explain inside. Ragnok's letting us use the conference room." "Ragnok," Ron repeated. "You're on first-name terms with the director of Gringotts." He didn't give me a choice about the first-name part. He just introduced himself as Ragnok and kept going. Harry was already moving toward the corridor. "Come on." They settled around the conference table, Harry at the center, Hermione beside him already pulling out a notebook that she had apparently had in her dressing gown pocket, Ron across from them looking at the spread of documents on the table with the cautious expression of someone who suspected the documents were about to say something personally inconvenient. Harry talked for 20 minutes straight. He laid it out plainly, without embellishment, in the same order he'd learned it himself: the scroll, the assets, the power of attorney, the Wizengamot seat, the proxy votes. He put the key documents on the table as he got to them: the withdrawal ledger, the POA document, the registry of proxy votes. He watched Hermione's face cycle through astonishment, fury, and something close to academic intensity. He watched Ron's face do something more complicated and slower. When he got to the Weasley payments, he looked at Ron directly and said it without softening it, because he'd decided in the conference room that the only way through was straight. 1,200 galleons in 1992, disbursed as an anonymous educational grant. 3 more payments after that. All anonymous. All from my vault. Ron was very still. "What? I don't think your family knew where it came from. I don't think it was your fault, and I don't think it means anything bad about your family." Harry kept his voice level. "But I thought you should hear it from me." A long pause. Ron was staring at a fixed point somewhere on the tabletop. His jaw worked once. That's the money Mum got for our school supplies second year. She cried when it arrived because she thought it was a charity thing and Dad made a joke about it being from the Hogwarts Alumni Benevolence Trust and he stopped. She kept the letter. Mum kept the letter. I know. Dumbledore sent her a letter from my family's vault. Ron's voice had gone flat in a way that was worse than if he'd shouted. And signed it with a fake charity. Yes. Another silence. Then Ron looked up. What are we doing about it? Hermione exhaled like she'd been holding it. Harry allowed himself a small breath of something that might have been relief. We're filing a formal Gringotts legal claim against the estate management conducted under Dumbledore's power of attorney, Harry said. Ragnok is our legal champion under the terms of my mother's scroll. The claim covers unauthorized withdrawals, improper proxy voting, suppression of the will, and failure to honor my mother's designated guardianship provisions. Hermione had her notebook open and was writing before he'd finished the sentence. The suppression of the will is huge, she said. That's not just financial misconduct. If the will named Sirius as guardian and was never read, Sirius went to Azkaban without a trial and without anyone producing the will that named him guardian of a 14-month-old. Harry said it quietly. Yeah. The room absorbed that. Can we get Sirius freed? Hermione asked. That's a separate track. Ragnok says it's possible, but it runs through the DMLE and requires a formal trial, which means we need the will entered into evidence through official channels first. Harry put his hand flat on the table. One thing at a time. The claim goes out this morning. I want the Wizengamot seat claimed before anyone can move to block it. And I need both of you, not as witnesses, not as bystanders. I need Hermione doing research on every vote Dumbledore cast by proxy and whether any of them can be challenged. I need Ron because, he paused. Because you know how the wizarding political world actually works in a way I don't. You grew up in it. Your dad works at the ministry. You know where the bodies are buried, politically speaking. Ron blinked. I mean, I know Dad's talked about, he stopped. Then, more carefully, yeah. Yeah, I know a few things. Ragnok came back into the room at that point with 2 additional goblins and a tray of something hot that turned out to be a very strong tea, which Ron fell on with the desperation of someone whose nervous system was still trying to catch up with the morning. Ragnok took his seat at the head of the table, looked at Hermione's already half-full notebook with an expression of measured approval, and set a new stack of documents on the table. The formal claim document is prepared, he said, placing it in front of Harry. I want to walk you through each section before you read it, because the language of Class 7 instruments has several nuances that are. His amber eyes moved to Hermione. Miss Granger. You look as though you wish to say something. Hermione straightened slightly, the way she did when a figure of authority acknowledged her directly. I want to understand the legal structure. Specifically, what remedies are available under a Class 7 claim? Can Gringotts compel the return of withdrawn funds, or only seek damages? And what jurisdiction does Goblin law have over the Wizengamot seat issue? That seems like it would fall under ministry law rather than. The Class 7 instrument was filed in 1981 under a joint treaty framework that predates the Ministry of Magic by several centuries, Ragnok said, and he said it with the pleasant patience of someone who enjoys correcting misconceptions. Goblins have been managing the wealth of magical Britain since before there was a ministry to regulate us. The Class 7 claim operates in parallel with ministry jurisdiction, it does not replace it, but it cannot be overruled by it. Regarding remedies, we can compel return of funds, we can seek compound interest calculated at the Goblin standard rate, which is, I should note, rather more aggressive than the ministry's standard, we can file for restitution of proxied votes in the Wizengamot, and we can submit the will to the Wizengamot's hereditary registry as evidence in a formal estate challenge. He looked at her steadily. Does that address your questions? Most of them. She was writing quickly. What's the Goblin compound interest rate? 17% annually, calculated from the date of first unauthorized withdrawal. Hermione stopped writing and looked up. 14 years at 17% compound on, she did the mental math, and whatever number she arrived at made her set down her quill very carefully. Quite, said Ragnok. Ron looked between them. How much are we talking? With interest accrued on the withdrawn funds, Ragnok said, and accounting for lost investment gains on assets that were improperly liquidated, the total claim value sits at approximately 23 million galleons. He let that number take up the space it needed. Before legal costs, which are our problem, not Lord Potter's. The room was quiet for a moment. 23 million, Harry said. Approximately. The number may rise as our accountants complete the full audit. There are several investment accounts we are still reconciling. Dumbledore doesn't have that kind of money, Ron said. Nobody has that kind of, that's Dumbledore does not need to have it, Ragnok said. Under the Class 7 claim, restitution can be claimed against the Order of the Phoenix Trust, which received the majority of the funds, as well as any personal assets Dumbledore holds under the power of attorney. Gringotts has already identified several. He folded his hands. We also intend to subpoena the records of every transaction made from Vault 3 since 1981, which will require a Wizengamot order. That is why the seat reclamation is urgent. Lord Potter needs a vote in the chamber before this claim goes public. When does the public find out? Harry asked. The formal notice to the Wizengamot will be delivered at 8 a.m., Ragnok said. The personal notice to Dumbledore at the same time. After that, I estimate you have approximately 3 hours before someone in the ministry leaks it to the Prophet. Then we need to move fast. Harry looked at the formal claim document. Walk me through the sections. Ragnok walked him through it in 30 minutes, methodical, thorough, pausing when Harry asked questions and answering without condescension, which Harry noticed and appreciated. The sections covered unauthorized asset management, improper execution of power of attorney, suppression of testamentary documents, unauthorized proxy voting, and a final section that Ragnok introduced with a slight shift in tone. Section 7, Ragnok said. This is the section that will cause the most difficulty. Harry looked at the heading. Willful negligence of wardship and physical welfare of ward. My living conditions, Harry said. Your living conditions, Ragnok confirmed. As power of attorney and de facto guardian, Dumbledore had a legal duty of care toward you as a minor. We have, and I want to be transparent about how we obtained this, an account of your living conditions at Privet Drive that was submitted to Gringotts in 1987 by a Hogwarts portrait who wished to remain anonymous. His expression was carefully neutral. The account describes a child living in a cupboard under the stairs, receiving inadequate nutrition, performing labor without compensation, and receiving clothing and personal effects substantially below the standard of other household members. All of which fall under the Magical Welfare Standards Act of 1952, which Dumbledore, as your magical guardian, was legally required to uphold. The room was very quiet. Hermione was not writing. She was looking at her notebook with the expression of someone performing an advanced act of emotional regulation. Ron was looking at the table. Harry looked at the document. He thought about saying something, then decided against it. Does the section need to go in? It strengthens the claim considerably, Ragnok said. It converts what might appear to be financial mismanagement into a pattern of systematic neglect. The financial element begins to look intentional rather than incidental. A pause. But it is your choice. This section concerns your personal life in a way the financial sections do not. We will not include it without your explicit consent. Harry was quiet for a moment. Hermione still wasn't writing. He could hear her breathing. Include it, he said. She finally looked up. He made choices, Harry said, without looking at either of them. He made them deliberately and he'd make them again and call them necessary. I'm not going to make it easier for him to do that by protecting him from what those choices looked like from the inside. He looked at Ragnok. Include it. Ragnok nodded and made a notation. We will include it. I would suggest, Lord Potter, that you review the witness statement before it is filed, and add any additional detail that you deem relevant. I'll do it this morning. Good. Ragnok looked around the table. Then unless there are further questions, I suggest we move to the next stage. The hereditary registry opens at 7. I have arranged early access. We will file the seat reclamation, and you will walk out of there as a voting member of the Wizengamot before the claim notices are delivered. He stood. I would ask your associates to remain here. The registry visit requires only Lord Potter and a Gringotts representative. I'm going with him, Hermione said. The registry doesn't prohibit witnesses, she said, with the smooth confidence of someone who had read the relevant regulations in the last 45 minutes. I checked the summary document. There's no restriction on accompanying parties in the Hereditary Registry Act of 1799, and the amendment of 1923 that added witness requirements actually implies the right of accompaniment. She met Ragnok's gaze steadily. "I'd like to come." Ragnok looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone reassessing a situation. "You may come," he said. Ron looked between Hermione's triumphant calm and Ragnok's recalibrated expression. "Should I stay here?" Harry said. "Read through the withdrawal ledger. Your dad works at the ministry. I want to know if you recognize any of the political context around the proxy votes. Write down anything that seems significant." Ron straightened slightly, the wrong shoe morning and the shock about the Weasley payments receding behind something that looked like purpose. Yeah, all right." He pulled the ledger toward him. "Go sort your ancestral seed out or whatever." The ministry's hereditary registry was housed in a basement sub-office that smelled like old parchment and enchanted dust, staffed at this early hour by a single witch who looked startled to have visitors at 7 in the morning and considerably more startled when Ragnok placed a Class 7 instrument of reclamation on her desk alongside a Gringotts notarized declaration of Harry's identity and legal status. She read the documents with her glasses on and then off and then on again. She looked at Harry, who met her gaze without expression. "Lord Potter," she said finally, and her voice had the reverent quality of someone discovering a historical document was real. This is a formal seat reclamation." "Yes," Harry said. "The Potter seat has been listed as proxy held since 1982, I'll need to," she was already moving, pulling folders, cross-referencing. "I'll need the proxy termination filed simultaneously with the seat reclamation. Otherwise there'll be an overlap in the voting record and the Wizengamot Administrative Office will flag it and it'll go to committee and that could take. We have prepared both documents," Ragnok said, and set a second folder on the desk. She opened it, read, and nodded with the relieved efficiency of a bureaucrat whose problem has been solved before she finished articulating it. She stamped, signed, cross-referenced, stamped again. She produced a form from the bottom drawer that clearly hadn't been used in some time and filled it out in her careful, practiced hand. She asked Harry to sign twice, Ragnok to countersign once, and Hermione, after a moment's uncertainty, to sign as attending witness. Then she opened a small cabinet behind her desk, took out a ring in a velvet-lined case, and set it on the desk in front of Harry. It was a signet ring, gold, set with a stone that was deep ruby but shot through with a vein of silver that moved when the light caught it. The Potter family crest was on the face, a shield with a rampant stag, which Harry recognized from his father's wedding photo. The ring looked old. Not old like it was deteriorating, old like it had been waiting. "This has been held in the registry vault since the death of James Potter in 1981, the witch said quietly. "Under standard Wizengamot procedure, the seat ring is held in trust for the heir. You are the heir." She paused. "It's yours." Harry picked it up. It was heavier than he expected. He looked at it for a moment, at the stag that was also an animagus form and a patronus and the shape of something he'd been missing in a way he couldn't have named before last night. He put it on his right hand. It sized itself immediately, settling against his finger with a faint warmth that wasn't magic so much as age, the feeling of something clicking into the place it had always belonged. Hermione made a small sound beside him. Not a word. Just a sound that meant something. "The seat is now registered as active under Harry James Potter, Lord of the ancient and noble house of Potter," the witch said, noting it in her ledger. "Your first formal sitting opportunity will be at the next Wizengamot session, scheduled for..." "When is the next session?" Harry asked. She checked her calendar. 3 weeks, ordinarily. But emergency sessions can be called with 48 hours notice and a petition signed by no fewer than 10 sitting members. She hesitated. If, hypothetically, a matter of significant legal weight were to come before the body, a petition for emergency session could be filed with the clerk of the Wizengamot. "How many signatures do we have?" Harry asked, looking at Ragnok. "At present, none," Ragnok said. However, I anticipate that the delivery of the claim notice at 8 a.m. will generate a significant number of members who will find an emergency session very much in their personal interest. He allowed himself something that was almost a smile. We will have 10 signatures by lunchtime. They were back at Gringotts by 7:45. Ron had filled 4 pages of notes from the withdrawal ledger, written in the energetic shorthand of someone who had found the task considerably more interesting than expected. He looked up when they came in and his eyes went immediately to the ring on Harry's hand. Is that Potter family signet? Wizengamot seat ring. Harry sat down. What did you find? Right. Ron spread his notes. So I recognized 3 of the political contexts around the proxy votes, from stuff Dad mentioned at home. The 1993 vote on the Magical Creatures' Rights Amendment, the Potter proxy voted against. Dad said that vote was closer than anyone expected and that if it had gone the other way it would have changed the status of several creature species in British law. He paused. Dumbledore has publicly stated he supports creature rights. He voted your seat against creature rights. Because it would have given goblins additional legal standing, Ragnok said from the doorway, and his voice was very flat. He came back to the table and sat. The amendment would have extended certain property rights to goblins, among others. Dumbledore voted it down using the Potter proxy. He looked at Harry. We know. It was noted in our records at the time. It was one of several reasons the director in 1993 filed an internal memorandum recommending that Gringotts pursue activation of the Class 7 scroll at the earliest opportunity. A pause. We did not have access to Lord Potter at the time. He was at Hogwarts, under Dumbledore's direct oversight. The shape of it was getting clearer with every hour, Harry thought. Not a dramatic, twirling mustache villainy, just a man with a very long reach, very careful management of assets and people and information, and a consistent habit of making choices that kept everything convenient and himself at the center. Keep going, Harry said to Ron. Ron went through his notes for the next 20 minutes, cross-referencing with the documents on the table. By the time he finished, they had a picture that was both more and less simple than Harry had expected. The financial withdrawals were significant, but the political manipulation through the proxy votes was arguably more damaging in terms of precedent. Dumbledore hadn't just managed Harry's money. He'd managed Harry's political voice. At 8:02, Ragnok's assistant came to the door and said, quietly, that the notices had been delivered. The room felt slightly different after that, charged in the way a room feels after a decision that can't be unmade. He'll have read it by now, Hermione said. He reads his correspondence immediately in the morning. His personal secretary, a portrait of a former minister, handles overnight mail and flags anything significant. Ragnok's knowledge of Dumbledore's household routine was said without comment and did not invite any. He will have read it within the first minute. What will he do? Ron asked. He'll go to the ministry, Harry said, and he was sure of it in a way that felt instinctive. He'll try to get ahead of it. He'll go to Fudge or someone in the legal office and try to frame it before the story has a shape. He looked at Ragnok. Can we put anything in front of him legally? Anything that prevents him from, I don't know, preemptively filing something, or lobbying the Wizengamot members before, not directly, Ragnok said. However, the formal claim notice includes a standard Gringotts legal hold clause, which prevents any party named in the claim from accessing, modifying, or transferring any asset currently under dispute. That includes the Order of the Phoenix Trust account and any Potter estate funds he currently holds. He paused. He cannot move the money. He cannot return it quietly and make this go away before it becomes public. As of 8 a.m. this morning, every galleon that was taken from Vault 3 is frozen in place. Hermione looked up. That's brilliant. It is standard procedure, Ragnok said, with the modesty of someone who knows exactly how good they are. Now. The formal claim has been filed. The seat has been reclaimed. The money is frozen. The next stage is the Wizengamot emergency session, which we expect to petition for by end of day. He looked at Harry. But before the session, there is something else we should discuss. He took from his coat pocket a small envelope, sealed in dark wax, and set it on the table. This arrived this morning from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, he said. Head Amelia Bones requests a private meeting with Lord Potter at his earliest convenience. He looked at Harry steadily. She is not Dumbledore's ally. She is not the Ministry's ally, exactly, she is the law's ally, which is a different and considerably more useful thing. He paused. I recommend you take the meeting. Harry picked up the envelope. The seal was the DMLE crest, scales and a wand, crossed. He broke it and read the note inside. Short, direct, in a handwriting that pressed hard into the paper as if the writer had strong opinions about the permanence of words. Lord Potter, I am aware of this morning's filing. I have been aware of certain irregularities in the management of your family's estate for some time without the legal standing to act. I believe you now have that standing. If you are willing to speak with me, I can offer information that will significantly strengthen your position. Come to the DMLE at noon. Tell the front desk you are there for a meeting with the head. A. Bones. Harry handed it to Hermione, who read it and handed it to Ron, who read it and let out a low whistle. Amelia Bones, Ron said. Dad says she's the one person at the Ministry Dumbledore genuinely can't work around. She doesn't owe him anything. Her family's old money, her seat on the Wizengamot is independent, and she has a reputation for being, he searched for the word. Immovable, Ragnok offered. That, Ron agreed. Harry looked at the letter. Then at the ring on his hand. Then at the window, where London was fully awake now, the morning light coming through hard and clean. Tell me about the will, he said to Ragnok. I want to understand exactly what it says before I go to the DMLE. And I want to know, the Edinburgh townhouse. Is it habitable? Ragnok blinked. It is structurally sound. It has been magically maintained by automated Gringotts preservation charms since 1981. It would require cleaning and some updating, but yes, it is habitable with minor preparation. I need a place to stay that isn't Privet Drive, Harry said. And I need somewhere my friends can stay. Can we have access to it today? Ragnok looked at him for a moment with an expression that was close to something warm, not sentiment, but respect of a very specific and goblin variety. You are the registered owner of the property, Lord Potter. You may enter it whenever you choose. Then get the keys sorted. Harry stood up. We have 3 hours before the DMLE meeting. I want to review the will, go through section 7 of the claim so I can add my statement, and eat something because I haven't since last night and I'm fairly sure good legal decisions require actual food. He looked at Hermione and Ron. You're both with me. All the way through this. Obviously, Hermione said, like it wasn't a question. Yeah, Ron said, and there was something resolved in his voice, the flat note of earlier in the morning burned away into something steadier. Yeah, obviously. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday morning. Owls crossed overhead. People went to work. The Prophet's morning edition was being sold on the corner of Diagon Alley, today's headline something about a Quidditch transfer, nothing yet about what had been set in motion at 8 a.m. in the quiet machine of the oldest bank in Wizarding Britain. That would change. The clock on the conference room wall ticked past 9. Harry sat back down, opened the folio, and pulled out the will. He read his parents' last wishes for the first time in his 15-year-old life, in a Gringotts conference room with the smell of strong tea and old parchment, while his 2 best friends sat on either side of him and London went about its business outside, entirely unaware that the quiet legal earthquake that had started in a dusty attic at midnight was still rolling outward, finding every fault line it had been looking for all along. Chapter 3. The Wizengamot Shakes. Amelia Bones had the kind of office that told you everything about the person who occupied it. No decorative flourishes, no portraits of influential friends, no trophies of past victories mounted on the walls. Just a wide desk buried in organized stacks of parchment, a window that looked out onto the ministry's atrium with the curtains pulled halfway like she'd stopped bothering to pretend she found the view inspiring, and a set of bookshelves where the books were actually read, spines cracked, bookmarks bristling, several lying open and face down in a way that would have made Hermione physically uncomfortable. She was already standing when Harry walked in, which wasn't what he'd expected. He'd half prepared for the formal reception, the measured handshake, the gestured seat, the careful establishment of who was doing whom a favor. Instead she came around the desk, looked at him directly, and said, "You're taller than the photographs," as if that settled something. "Most of them were taken when I was 11, Harry said. "Sit down." She returned to her side of the desk and sat with the decisive economy of someone whose time was a finite and carefully managed resource. She looked at Hermione and Ron, who had been permitted entry after a brief, evaluating pause. "Your associates. Granger and Weasley." It wasn't a question. "Arthur Weasley's son." "Yes," Ron said. "Your father is a good man." She said it like a fact, not a compliment, and moved on before Ron could respond. She opened a file on her desk, thick, well-worn at the edges, the kind of file that had been opened and closed many times over years. "I'm going to be direct with you, Lord Potter, because I don't have time for anything else and I suspect you don't either, given what this morning has set in motion." "Please," Harry said. "I have known about the irregularities in the management of your estate since 1993. She let that land without dressing it up. A junior analyst in our Financial Crimes Division filed an internal report noting anomalies in the Potter estate's transaction history. She was reassigned within a week. Her report was not acted upon." Bones looked at him steadily over her monocle. "I kept a copy." She slid a folded parchment across the desk. Harry picked it up. It was a 2-page document, official DMLE header, dated November 1993. He scanned it. The language was formal and careful in the way people write when they know they're putting something dangerous on paper, but the content was clear. Unauthorized withdrawals from a minor's estate. No Wizengamot order authorizing same. Power of attorney document flagged for procedural review. Recommended action, full audit. Recommended action, full audit. Filed, archived, buried. "Why are you giving me this now?" Harry asked. He wasn't suspicious exactly, more precise. He wanted to understand the shape of her motivation before he decided how much to trust it. Bones leaned back in her chair. "Because for 2 years I have had the report and not the standing. The Financial Crimes Division won't act without direction from the Minister, and Fudge will not move against Dumbledore. The man is politically essential to him, regardless of whatever is actually happening. The DMLE operates under the Ministry, which means I operate under Fudge, which means there are things I can see very clearly and cannot touch." She paused. "You, however, are not the DMLE. You are a private citizen who has filed a legitimate legal claim through an independent institution. You have the standing I don't." Another pause. "I'm giving you the report because I want it used." Harry folded the report and tucked it into his folio. "What else do you have?" Something in her expression shifted, not surprise, but a recalibration. Like she'd been prepared for gratitude or hesitation and had gotten neither. "2 things. The first is the analyst who wrote the report. She now works in magical contracts, but she kept her own records and she has been waiting for exactly this scenario. Her name is Williamson, Clara Williamson. She will testify if formally subpoenaed by the Wizengamot." Bones picked up a card and placed it on the desk. "Her office number. I've already spoken with her this morning." "You contacted her this morning," Harry said. "Before this meeting." "I contacted her at 8:15. Bones allowed herself the smallest possible version of a satisfied expression. "The second thing is more complicated. The proxy votes." Hermione sat forward slightly. "Dumbledore has used the Potter proxy 41 times, Bones said. "I've known the number, but not the full significance of each vote. What I can tell you is that 3 of those votes directly affected ministry legislation that was under DMLE jurisdiction. The Underage Magic Restriction Amendment. She looked at Harry. You know about that one. He voted to pass it, Harry said. Using my seat. Then offered to help me with the resulting warning. Yes. Her voice was dry as old paper. The second vote relevant to my department was the 1992 vote on the Witness Protection Provisions Amendment. The Potter proxy voted to narrow the scope of witness protection eligibility in Wizengamot proceedings. The amendment passed. It is currently the primary reason why certain witnesses to Death Eater activities in the First War have declined to come forward. They don't qualify for protection under the current narrow provisions. She watched Harry process this. The third was in 1994. The Potter proxy voted against expanding DMLE investigative jurisdiction in cases involving Hogwarts-age students. The amendment failed. My department consequently has no authority to investigate certain categories of magical incidents involving minors at Hogwarts. She folded her hands. I will leave you to consider the implications of that in the context of your first 4 years at school. The room was quiet. Ron was looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone rearranging a large number of things simultaneously. Hermione had her notebook open but wasn't writing. She was listening with all of herself, the way she did when information was important enough that writing felt like it would miss something. He stripped your department's authority to investigate things at Hogwarts, Harry said slowly, and then sent me to Hogwarts. Where, among other events, you encountered a dark artifact in your first year, a basilisk in your second, a tournament that nearly killed you in your fourth, and, she stopped. I don't need to catalog it for you. You were there. Why hasn't this been front-page news? Ron asked. Because proxy votes are public record but nobody reads them, Bones said. They're filed in the Wizengamot archive in print roughly the size of a legal footnote. No journalist has connected the dots because the dots require reading 14 years of parliamentary records, cross-referencing them against the power of attorney document that was itself buried in the estate registry, and having sufficient political context to understand what each vote meant. She looked at Hermione. Miss Granger, I imagine you understood the significance within about 30 seconds of being told about the votes this morning. Hermione hesitated between honesty and modesty, landed on honesty. 20, actually. Precisely. The story isn't hidden. It's just dense. Bones looked at Harry. What do you need from me? Testimony, Harry said. When we get the emergency Wizengamot session, and we're getting it, I need you there. Not as DMLE head, if that's legally complicated. As a Wizengamot member in your own right. You hold a seat. The Bones family seat. Yes. Then as a member who has direct knowledge of the suppressed DMLE report. And who can speak to the implications of the proxy votes on your department's operational capacity. He looked at her steadily. Is that something you can do without it becoming a ministry political problem? Bones considered this for a moment. It will absolutely become a ministry political problem, she said. But that is Fudge's problem and mine, not yours. Yes. I'll testify. Harry stood and extended his hand. Bones looked at it for a moment, at the Potter signet ring, the stag and the moving silver vein in the deep red stone, and then shook it. Her grip was direct and unornamented. I'll need the petition signatures for the emergency session, Harry said. Do I have yours? You've had mine since you walked through that door, she said. They were back at the Edinburgh townhouse by 2 in the afternoon, which Griphook the Younger had unlocked and aired out between the Gringotts meeting and the DMLE visit with the efficiency of someone who anticipated needs before they were spoken. It was a Georgian terrace on a quiet new town street, 4 stories of warm sandstone that smelled like stone dust and old wood and the particular closed-in quiet of a well-made house that had been waiting patiently for decades. The furniture was still there, covered in white sheets that the Gringotts cleaning charm had kept dust-free, and the kitchen worked, and the library on the second floor had shelves from floor to ceiling and a window seat that looked out over the street. Hermione walked into the library and stopped breathing for a moment. "You're going to need to be dragged out of there," Ron told her. "Yes," she agreed, without apology, and went in. They spent the afternoon working. Harry added his witness statement to Section 7 of the claim. He wrote it at the kitchen table in the steady, careful handwriting he used for important things, not the fast scrawl of homework. He wrote about the cupboard. He wrote about the Christmases, the food, the way he'd learned not to ask questions and the specific shape of what that had done to him over years. He wrote it plainly, without dramatics, because the facts were dramatic enough on their own and he'd decided that plainness was more devastating than eloquence in this particular context. He gave it to Hermione to read when he was done. She read it, said nothing for almost a minute, and then said, very quietly, "Harry, this will matter. To the Wizengamot. This will matter a lot." "Good," he said. Ron came in from the sitting room where he'd been working through the proxy vote documentation with the references from Bones's meeting. He had 7 additional votes flagged beyond the 3 they'd already identified. He spread his notes on the kitchen table with the focused energy of someone who had discovered a talent they hadn't known they had. This one from 1991, the Potter proxy voted to maintain the current oversight structure for Hogwarts headmaster appointments. If the amendment had passed, the Hogwarts Board of Governors would have had veto power over the headmaster position. He looked up. As it stands, the minister and the headmaster's own assessment are what maintain the position. Meaning Dumbledore's job is secure from external challenge as long as the minister likes him, Harry said. He voted to protect his own job, Ron said. Using your seat. Add it to the list. By 5 o'clock they had the 10 signatures for the emergency session petition. Amelia Bones had been efficient, and several other Wizengamot members who had been watching the Potter situation with private concern for years had signed readily once a credible legal framework existed. Ragnok filed the petition at 5:15. The clerk of the Wizengamot confirmed the session for Friday at 10 a.m., 41 hours away. The prophet ran the story at 6. Harry found out because Ron, who had gone out for food, came back through the door holding a copy with an expression that was somewhere between grimly satisfied and mildly alarmed. The headline was large enough to read from across the kitchen. Lord Potter files suit against Dumbledore. Gringotts claim targets Potter estate management. Wizengamot seat misuse. The story beneath was surprisingly accurate. Someone at the Prophet had done actual journalism, or more likely Ragnok had issued a precisely worded press statement designed to establish the narrative before anyone else could. The key facts were there: the Gringotts legal claim, the frozen assets, the proxy votes, the dormant Wizengamot seat now reclaimed. It stopped short of the will and the wardship section, both of which were still sealed pending the formal session. Rita Skeeter didn't write it, Hermione noted, reading over Harry's shoulder. No, Ron agreed, checking the byline. Someone called Harriet Doyle. I've never heard of her. She's been writing investigative pieces for the Prophet's finance section for years, Hermione said. She wrote a very good piece about the misallocation of ministry educational funds in 1993 that nobody read because it was in the finance section. She paused. Ragnok would have known who to send the press statement to. Of course he would, Harry said, and felt something close to warmth toward the Goblin director's methodical brilliance. He read the story once, put the paper down, and ate his dinner. He was very deliberately not thinking about what Dumbledore was doing at this particular moment, and the deliberateness of the not thinking was its own kind of information about how much he was actually thinking about it. The knock at the Edinburgh townhouse door came at 7:45. Harry answered it himself. He'd told Griphook, who was staying in the small ground-floor study that had apparently been configured as a secretary's room, that he wanted to answer his own door. Dumbledore stood on the doorstep. He was in his traveling robes, deep blue, silver stars, entirely inappropriate for a Georgian Edinburgh street in July in a way that was either oblivious or entirely deliberate. He looked as he always looked, tall, composed, the half-moon spectacles catching the evening light, the white beard settled on his chest. He looked like every portrait of every wise man who had ever been the subject of a portrait. He looked like he had arranged himself this way on purpose. His eyes, though. His eyes were doing something more complicated. Not distressed, Dumbledore's eyes never did distressed. But something was working behind them, a calculation being performed in real time, and the calculation hadn't resolved yet. "Harry," he said, with the warmth of long practice. "May I come in?" "No," Harry said. A pause. Just a flicker of something, not shock exactly, but the adjustment of someone who had prepared for several scenarios and was recalculating which one applied. "I understand you must have a great many questions. I have all the answers," Harry said. "I don't have questions. I have a claim filed with Gringotts, a Wizengamot session in 41 hours, and a witness statement from Amelia Bones." He looked at Dumbledore with an expression that was entirely level. Not angry. Not afraid. Just clear, in the way a cold morning is clear, everything visible, nothing softened. "I'm not going to invite you in, and I'm not going to tell you what our legal strategy is, and I'm not going to reassure you that this isn't as serious as it looks." He paused. "It's exactly as serious as it looks." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The Edinburgh street behind him was quiet and amber-lampied, a couple walking a dog in the middle distance, the ordinary peaceful evening of a city that didn't know what was happening on this particular doorstep. "I want you to know," Dumbledore said, and his voice had shifted, not the warm headmaster register, but something older and more direct, "that everything I did was done with the intention of protecting you." "I know," Harry said. "I believe that's true. I also know you voted my Wizengamot seat to pass the law you then offered to help me with. I know you kept my parents' will from being read. I know Sirius went to Azkaban while that will sat in a vault naming him my guardian." He didn't raise his voice. "I know I grew up in a cupboard while you managed my family's money." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "You can intend to protect someone and still do damage. Both things are true." Dumbledore stood very still. "Harry, I'll see you at the Wizengamot session," Harry said, and closed the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment with his hand flat on the closed door, listening. After a few seconds, he heard the quiet, particular sound of someone operating, there and then not there. He went back to the kitchen. Ron looked up from the table. Hermione looked up from the notebook. They'd both heard enough through the door to know who had been there. "You all right?" Ron asked. "Yeah," Harry said, and meant it in a way that surprised him slightly. He sat down. He looked, "I don't know. Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Hermione asked carefully. Harry considered. "More certainty. He always seems certain. He thought about the calculation he'd seen moving behind the blue eyes. Like he was figuring out whether he'd made a mistake. Not about the things he did. About me. About whether I was going to be manageable." He picked up his cup of tea, which had gone cold. He wasn't sure. "That's new," Ron said. "Yeah," Harry agreed. "It is." The next 2 days had the quality of something pulled very tight. Harry spent most of them at the Edinburgh house or at Gringotts, working through the documentation with Ragnok's team, reviewing his witness statement, reading through the additional information Bones had provided. Hermione worked on the proxy vote analysis with a focused intensity that produced 32 pages of annotated cross-referencing by Thursday evening. Ron made himself useful in a dozen practical ways, running documents between locations, cross-referencing with his own knowledge of wizarding political history, and doing a continuous low-level job of keeping the atmosphere from tipping into anxiety by being determinately, sometimes irritatingly normal. He also wrote to his mother. Harry didn't ask him to, and Ron didn't announce it. He just appeared from the study on Wednesday morning with an envelope in his hand and said, "I wrote Mum. She needs to know about the payments. Before the session." He looked at Harry with the directness that was the best thing about him. "She's going to be upset. Not at you. At all of it. But she should know before it goes public." "Yeah," Harry said. Good. Molly Weasley's reply arrived Thursday afternoon by a large brown barn owl that looked like it had been sent at considerable urgency. Ron read the letter, folded it, put it in his pocket, and sat down at the kitchen table. He was quiet for a while. "She's angry," he said. It's complicated. She's angry at Dumbledore and she's embarrassed and she wants to give you money back, which you obviously shouldn't let her, and she's already written to Dad who apparently needs to sit down." He looked up. "But she says she's proud of you. And she wants you to know that her house has always been yours, regardless." His voice had an edge on it that wasn't quite emotion but was one step away. "She's good, my mum. She doesn't pretend about things once she knows the truth." "I know," Harry said. Tell her the money isn't the point and she doesn't need to do anything. The claim isn't against your family. It was never against your family. I know that. She knows that. She just needed to say the other thing." Thursday evening Ragnok came to the townhouse for a final briefing. He sat at the head of the kitchen table like he'd done it 100 times and laid out the session structure with the precision of a general's briefing before a campaign. The claim would be formally presented by Ragnok himself as Gringotts' legal champion. Harry would speak once, to formally identify himself as Lord Potter and to read a brief portion of his witness statement. Amelia Bones would present the DMLE evidence. The proxy vote analysis, now complete, would be entered as documentary evidence. The will would be unsealed and read for the first time on the Wizengamot floor. "What do we expect from Dumbledore's side?" Hermione asked. "Procedural challenges," Ragnok said. "Attempts to contest the Class 7 instrument's jurisdiction. Possibly a motion to seal certain documents on grounds of national security. He may argue that financial details of the Order of the Phoenix Trust involve sensitive wartime information." He paused. "He will attempt to make this about Voldemort." Harry looked at him. "How do we counter that?" "By making it about the law," Ragnok said simply. "Voldemort is a compelling distraction. The law is a fact. Whenever he reaches for the first, we return to the second." "What's his strongest argument?" Harry asked. "Actually strong. Not just procedurally difficult, what's the argument that might actually resonate with Wizengamot members?" Ragnok looked at him with something that was close to appreciation. That he was acting in an impossible situation without clear precedent, that the threats of the early 1980s required rapid, sometimes extra-legal measures, and that the results, specifically, your survival, justify the means. He paused. "The argument is emotionally compelling to members old enough to remember the First War. It is weakest against the proxy votes, which had nothing to do with the war and everything to do with consolidating personal power. So we lead with the proxy votes in the session," Harry said. "Yes. Not the money. The money is the proof. The proxy votes are the pattern." Ragnok closed his folio. "Show the pattern first. Then the proof gives it weight." Harry nodded and looked at the ring on his hand. The stag gleamed in the kitchen light. "One more thing," Ragnok said, and his voice had shifted slightly, still professional, but with a layer beneath it. "Tomorrow, when you stand to speak as Lord Potter, there will be members of that body who were present in 1981. Who voted on measures that affected your family. Who have been comfortable, for 14 years, with the arrangement that existed." His amber eyes held Harry's steadily. "Some of them will be frightened of what this means for their own records. Some of them will be embarrassed. A few will be relieved. You do not need to manage any of those emotions. You simply need to speak clearly." A pause. "You are 15 years old, and you are about to address the oldest governing body in magical Britain as its newest member. That is remarkable. Do not be small about it." Harry looked at him for a moment. "I wasn't planning to be." Ragnok almost smiled. "No," he said. "I didn't think you were." Friday morning arrived cold for July, the Edinburgh sky a clean bright grey, the street outside the townhouse quiet and damp-cobbled. Harry was up before 6. He stood in the kitchen in the half-dark and drank his tea and thought about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of preparation. Ron came down at 6:30 still half asleep and made toast without speaking, which was exactly right. Hermione came down at 6:45 fully dressed, her notes in her bag, her expression the particular composite of nervous and ready that Harry associated with the morning of important exams, except this was better than that, he thought, because this wasn't about what they knew. It was about what they were going to do with it. The Wizengamot chambers were in the ministry's lowest level, deeper than the courtrooms Harry had seen during the pensive memory in 4th year. They descended in the ministry lifts in their formal robes. Gringotts had arranged robes for Harry that were both appropriately formal and unmistakably his own, deep forest green with the Potter crest embroidered subtly at the collar, nothing ostentatious, nothing that begged for attention, and the lift opened into an anteroom where Ragnok was waiting with 2 of his legal team, their dark suits in precise order, their expressions the professional blankness of goblins who had been waiting for this moment across many years and intended to perform it correctly. "The chamber is filling," Ragnok said without preamble. "The Prophet's Morning edition has run a second story, Section 7 of the claim leaked sometime overnight. The wardship details are public." Harry went still for a moment. "Who leaked it?" "Unknown. It could have been the ministry clerk who processed the filing. It could have been a Wizengamot member who had early access to the documents." Ragnok watched him carefully. "It changes the atmosphere in the chamber. The financial claim was political. The wardship details are personal. Members who are ambivalent about one will have stronger feelings about the other." "Stronger which way?" Ron asked. "Both ways," Ragnok said. "Those inclined to support the claim will be angry on Lord Potter's behalf. Those inclined to support Dumbledore will feel that the personal details were deployed unfairly and will look for ways to reframe the session as emotionally manipulative." "It's not emotional manipulation," Hermione said sharply. "It's relevant evidence of a legal duty of care that was." "I know that," Ragnok said calmly. "You know that. Lord Potter's legal team knows that. We must ensure the chamber knows it as well." He looked at Harry. "How you carry yourself in that room will matter. The facts are on our side. So is the law. But chambers are human spaces, and humans respond to the person as well as the argument." He straightened his jacket. "Are you ready?" Harry rolled his shoulders back. He thought about his mother at 21, writing a letter on a Tuesday because she had decided to be prepared. He thought about Sirius in Azkaban and the will in the vault and the cupboard under the stairs and the 41 proxy votes cast in his name without his knowledge or consent. He thought about Dumbledore on the Edinburgh doorstep, calculating. "Yes," Harry said. The chamber doors opened, and he walked through. The Wizengamot chamber was shaped like an amphitheater, tiered rows of seats arranged in a horseshoe around a central floor, the seats already occupied by the purple-robed members, 200 faces turning as the doors opened. The space was large and high-ceilinged and had the specific gravity of a room where important things had been decided for centuries. It smelled like old stone and parchment and the faint metallic edge of strong magic. Harry walked to the central floor without looking at the gallery. He heard the murmur move through the chamber like a wave, not the excited celebrity murmur he was used to, but something more complex and lower, the sound of people who were recalibrating. Dumbledore was in the chamber. He was not in his Wizengamot seat, he was seated in a separate chair to the side, the designated position for a party named in a claim. He was in his purple robes, his hands folded on his knee, his expression composed. He looked, Harry thought, very precisely like a man who had decided how to look. Their eyes met across the chamber floor. Harry held the eye contact for a moment, then looked away first, not because he needed to but because he'd finished looking and there was nothing more to get from it. He turned to face the chief warlock's position, currently occupied by a stern-faced witch in her 70s who Harry didn't know, and waited. "The Wizengamot is called to emergency session," the chief warlock said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, pursuant to a petition filed under Section 14 of the Wizengamot Emergency Provisions Act. The matter before this body is the Gringotts legal claim filed by Lord Harry James Potter against the estate management conducted under Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore's power of attorney. Director Ragnok of Gringotts Bank will present the claim. Ragnok stepped forward. He was short, relative to the chamber, but the chamber didn't diminish him. He had the quality of something old and assured in an old room, and when he began to speak his voice was pitched exactly right, no theater, no performance, just the clean delivery of information by someone who knew it was sufficient on its own. He led with the proxy votes. He laid out each of the 41 instances with the dates, the bill names, the outcomes, and the specific way each vote had benefited Dumbledore's personal or political agenda at the expense of the rights the Potter seat was meant to exercise. He presented the analysis without comment, which was more devastating than commentary would have been. The numbers and the pattern spoke. The chamber listened. Halfway through the proxy vote section, Harry heard a change in the room's atmosphere. Not a sound, exactly, more of a pressure shift, like the moment before rain. The members who had been composed were no longer entirely composed. He saw several of them looking at their own colleagues, the quick sideways glances of people running private calculations. Ragnok moved to the financial withdrawals. He was precise and specific, amounts, dates, recipient accounts. When he reached the order of the Phoenix Trust disbursements, the murmur in the chamber rose briefly and then settled into a harder silence. When he reached the Weasley payments, which Harry had asked Ragnok to handle briefly and without dramatics, as a factual element rather than a pointed accusation, the silence was complete. Then Ragnok paused. The Gringotts claim also includes Section 7, he said, and his voice shifted slightly, still professional, but quieter. Lord Potter will read his own statement. Harry stepped forward to the speaker's position. The chamber was very still. He looked up at 200 people and felt the weight of all of them, curiosity, discomfort, sorrow, political calculation, genuine shock, a few faces that were stone-cold neutral in the way that meant they'd already made their decision and didn't intend to let it be visible. He looked at none of them in particular and all of them at once. He read his statement. He read it the way he'd written it, plainly, in order, without pausing for effect. The cupboard. The food. The clothes. The way he'd been kept unaware of his own inheritance, his own legal status, his own family's wishes about his care. He read the part about the will. He read the part about Sirius. He did not look at Dumbledore while he read. He was aware of the chamber reacting, aware of it the way you're aware of weather, peripherally, without turning toward it, but he kept his eyes on the parchment and his voice level and read every word he had written until he reached the last line. The choices made about my life were made by someone with legal authority over my family's estate and a stated intention to protect me. I am not arguing that the intention was dishonest. I am arguing that intention does not substitute for accountability, that power over a child's life requires more than good intentions to justify, and that the body before which I am speaking has the authority and, I would submit, the obligation to address what was done under cover of that power. He folded the parchment and stepped back. The silence lasted 4 full seconds, which in a chamber of 200 people is a very long silence. Then Amelia Bones stood up. She spoke for 20 minutes. She presented the suppressed DMLE report, the testimony of Clara Williamson, and the 3 proxy votes that had directly hobbled her department's ability to act. She spoke in the measured, direct manner of a lawyer who knows her facts and has no need to raise her voice. When she reached the vote that had narrowed DMLE jurisdiction over Hogwarts-related incidents, she paused and looked at the chamber very steadily. This body voted in 1994 to limit our investigative powers in cases involving minors at Hogwarts, she said. That vote passed by 3 votes. One of those 3 was the Potter proxy. I want to be clear about the consequence. A child survived the Triwizard Tournament's 3rd task after being portkeyed to a graveyard and participating in a Death Eater ritual. The DMLE conducted no independent investigation because we lacked jurisdiction. We were told the incident was under Hogwarts administrative review. She let that sit. That is what the narrowing of jurisdiction looked like in practice. The chamber broke. Not chaotically, but the controlled professional silence gave way to urgent, overlapping voices, members turning to each other, several standing simultaneously. The chief warlock called for order twice before she got it. Dumbledore's advocate, a sharp-faced wizard Harry didn't know, rose immediately. The claim conflates personal decisions made under conditions of wartime emergency with systematic misconduct. The Class 7 instrument's jurisdiction over Wizengamot proceedings is itself questionable. The Class 7 instrument predates the Wizengamot, Ragnok said, with the patient clarity of someone who has been waiting for this objection. Under the 1312 Joint Sovereignty Agreement between Gringotts and the Magical Families Council, the body that preceded and constituted this Wizengamot, Goblin legal instruments hold concurrent jurisdiction with all subsequent magical governance bodies. This has never been successfully challenged in 700 years. He looked at the advocate without hostility. You are welcome to try. The advocate tried, for another 10 minutes, in 4 different legal directions. Ragnok dismantled each approach with the methodical patience of someone who has done the preparation and is simply retrieving the relevant answer. Harry watched from the center of the floor and said nothing, because nothing needed saying. Then the chief warlock said, "The chamber will hear from Albus Dumbledore." Dumbledore stood. He walked to the center of the floor, the same floor Harry had stood on, and stood there with the composure of someone who had addressed far more hostile audiences than this. He looked, for a moment, at Harry. And Harry looked back. And then Dumbledore looked out at the chamber and began to speak. The winter of 1981, he said, was the most dangerous period in the history of magical Britain since Grindelwald. The choices I made in those weeks were made under conditions that no legal instrument, however ancient, fully accounts for. His voice was its usual register, warm, carrying, the slight academic cadence of long practice. I placed Harry Potter with his only living blood relatives because his mother's sacrifice had created a protection that required a blood connection to maintain. I accepted power of attorney over his estate because there was no other person both willing and legally positioned to act. I made imperfect decisions in an impossible situation. He paused. The chamber was listening in the focused way chambers listen when they want to be persuaded. The proxy votes were cast in what I believed to be Harry's best interest, he continued. The financial management was directed toward the defense of the wizarding world against a threat that, I would remind this chamber, has not been fully defeated. His eyes moved across the members. Many of you were here during the First War. Many of you lost people. I ask you to consider what it means to hold a man accountable for decisions made in the shadow of that threat, using a 14-year-old document filed by a woman who could not have anticipated the circumstances her son would face. He was good, Harry thought. He was genuinely, undeniably good at this. The chamber was feeling it, the gravity of the First War, the weight of Dumbledore's credentials, the uncomfortable complexity of holding someone responsible for choices made in catastrophe. Harry could feel the room shifting slightly, not away from the claim but into a kind of hesitation. He had been waiting to see if Dumbledore would do this. He'd been fairly sure he would. He stepped back to the speaker's position. May I respond? The chief warlock looked at him, then at Ragnok, who nodded. Lord Potter has the floor. Harry looked at Dumbledore, who was still standing in the center of the chamber floor, and then at the chamber. He's right that 1981 was an emergency, Harry said. He's right that my mother's sacrifice created a protection that required blood. He's right that the choices were made under impossible conditions. He paused. He's also right that my mother couldn't have anticipated everything when she filed that scroll. A beat. Except that she could. She filed the scroll on the 29th of October, 1981. 3 days before she died. She had time to anticipate. She anticipated that someone might try to manage her son's life without his knowledge or consent. She anticipated it specifically enough to file a Class 7 instrument with Gringotts and write me a letter explaining exactly what it was for. The chamber was very still. The emergency argument works for October and November of 1981, Harry said. It does not work for the proxy vote in 1994. It does not work for the 7 years of financial withdrawals that post-date Voldemort's first defeat. It does not work for the decision to never read my parents' will. These were not emergency choices. They were ongoing choices, made over 14 years, that kept me uninformed, legally subordinate, and dependent on the person who was controlling my family's assets. He looked at Dumbledore directly. I'm not here to argue about the First War. I'm here because those choices continued long after the First War was over. Another silence. This one had a different quality, not hesitation, but the particular stillness of a room that has made up its mind. Dumbledore looked at Harry from across the chamber floor, and for the first time in Harry's life, the old man looked something close to uncertain. Not broken. Not shattered. Just uncertain, in the way a certainty becomes when it's been met with something it can't absorb. The matter will be put to a vote, the chief warlock said. Harry stepped back to his position and waited. Chapter 4, Ancient Rights, Ancient Wrongs. The vote took 11 minutes. Harry stood on the chamber floor while the chief warlock called the count, and he watched the purple robes shift and settle and the hands go up in the old formal Wizengamot gesture, right fist to left shoulder for assent, open palm forward for denial, and he counted without meaning to. The assents came first and came fast, which told him something about how much private agreement had been waiting for a legitimate container. The denials were fewer and slower, the hesitation of people who were calculating rather than decided. When it was done, the chief warlock announced the result in a voice that had been doing this for 30 years and had learned to give numbers without emphasis. 163 in favor of upholding the Gringotts legal claim. 31 against. 8 abstentions. She looked at her notes. The Wizengamot finds in favor of Lord Potter. The claim is upheld in full. Remedies will be determined by the joint Wizengamot-Gringotts Remedy Commission, to be constituted within 48 hours. She looked up. This session is not yet closed. We have one further matter. The chamber had been moving and breathing in the way it does after a significant vote, the release of held tension, the quiet conversation starting up in the rows, and now it settled again at her tone. The last will and testament of James Charles Potter and Lily Jean Potter, entered into Gringotts evidence on the 29th of October, 1981, will now be read into the record for the first time. She looked at Ragnok. Director. Ragnok came forward with a parchment that Harry recognized from the folio, older looking than the other documents, the edges slightly foxed, the wax seal broken only 2 days ago in a Gringotts conference room while the morning light came through a narrow window. He unrolled it with the careful precision of someone handling something that weighed more than paper ought to. The chamber was absolutely quiet. 200 people who had spent their careers in this room, who had heard every variety of legal argument and political theater, sat in complete silence while a goblin read a dead couple's last wishes aloud for the first time. The will was short. James and Lily Potter had been 21 years old when they wrote it, and it had the quality of something written by people who were scared but determined, practical, specific, without sentiment in the language but somehow saturated with it anyway. The guardianship clause was exactly as Ragnok had told Harry, Sirius Orion Black, primary. Frank and Alice Longbottom, secondary. The Dursley family specifically, explicitly, unambiguously excluded. The clause about Harry was one paragraph. Lily had written it, Harry knew her handwriting now, could pick it out from across a room, and it said that Harry was to be raised knowing his name, his family's history, and his own worth, and that any guardian who failed to provide these things would be in violation of the testamentary trust and subject to immediate legal challenge. Ragnok finished reading. He rolled the document and held it. The chamber remained quiet for 2 full seconds, and then it did not. Harry didn't track the individual voices. The sound was collective, outrage, disbelief, the particular angry murmur of people who had been comfortable for a long time and had just been shown what that comfort had cost someone else. He saw several members who had voted against the claim sitting very still with expressions that suggested they were reconsidering the vote they had just cast and would be unable to do anything about it. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was still in his chair to the side. He was looking at his hands, folded in his lap, and his face had a quality Harry had never seen on it before, not defeat, exactly, because defeat was too simple. More like the expression of a man who has spent a very long time telling himself a particular story about his choices and has just heard that story read aloud in a room full of witnesses and has had the experience, for the first time, of hearing how it sounds from outside. Harry watched him for a moment. He didn't feel what he'd expected to feel, not triumph, not satisfaction in any clean sense. What he felt was closer to a kind of tired clarity, the feeling of a weight being set down that you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten it was weight and thought it was just the shape of yourself. He looked away. Amelia Bones caught his eye from her seat. She gave him a nod, small, precise, the acknowledgement of one person to another who has done what they set out to do. He nodded back. The chief warlock called the chamber back to order for the procedural matters, the constitution of the Remedy Commission, the formal entry of all documents into the Wizengamot record, the referral of certain elements to relevant ministry departments. She was efficient and thorough and got through it in 20 minutes while the chamber hummed with suppressed conversation in every tier. When she declared the session closed, Harry didn't move immediately. He stood in the center of the floor while the chamber began to empty around him, while the purple robes moved and voices rose to normal conversational levels, while the business of consequence began its slow complicated work, and he looked up at the high chamber ceiling, vaulted stone, old and dark, with the faint tracery of enchantments in the mortar that had been there for centuries, and breathed. Hermione appeared at his shoulder. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, 163. Yeah. Harry, that's not a narrow margin. That's not a contested result. That's a decisive, unambiguous, I know. She made a small sound that was trying very hard not to be a sob and was mostly succeeding. He looked at her. Her eyes were bright and she was blinking at a determined rate and her notebook was clutched against her chest like armor. You're not going to cry in the Wizengamot chamber, he said. Obviously not, she said, and blinked harder. I'm very glad it worked. It worked because you wrote 32 pages of annotated proxy vote analysis. It worked because your mother planned for it 14 years ago, she said. And because you found the scroll, and opened it, and didn't wait for someone to tell you it was all right to act. She looked at him with the directness that was the truest thing about her. You decided to do something. That's not nothing. Ron materialized on Harry's other side from the direction of the public gallery, where he'd been watching from the seats allocated to non-member attendees. His expression was the particular composite of someone who has had a very large feeling and is managing it by pretending to be casual. So, he said. How does it feel to have sued one of the most powerful wizards in Britain and won before breakfast? It's nearly noon, Harry said. It's a figure of speech. He glanced around the emptying chamber. Where's Dumbledore? Harry looked toward the side chair. It was empty. He scanned the chamber, the remaining purple robes, members clustering in conversation, aides and legal representatives gathering documents. No white beard, no blue robes. He left during the procedural close, Hermione said quietly. She'd been watching. Just stood and walked out. Nobody stopped him. Harry considered this. He hadn't expected Dumbledore to be stopped, the claim was civil, not criminal, at this stage, and Dumbledore retained his Hogwarts position pending any further proceedings. The Remedy Commission would deal with the financial restitution. If there were to be criminal proceedings around the suppression of the will or the illegal guardianship, those would be separate, slower, and would move through Amelia Bones's department rather than the Wizengamot floor. It wasn't over, in other words. It was the end of the beginning, a real end, a solid one, but the building of consequence was going to take longer than a single Friday morning in a stone chamber. He had understood that going in. He understood it more clearly now, standing in the chamber's thinning crowd, the documents being gathered and the session closing around him. Ragnok found him before he reached the exit. A word, the Goblin said, and led him slightly aside, away from the outgoing flow of members. His legal team remained at the table, efficient and quiet. The Remedy Commission. I have a preliminary proposal that Gringotts will bring to the first meeting. I want you to have sight of it before we file. All right. The financial restitution from the Order of the Phoenix Trust and Dumbledore's personal assets under the POA will not cover the full claim value. He does not have 23 million galleons in accessible personal assets. Ragnok said this without inflection. We can pursue the remainder through a long-form payment arrangement, standard in large civil claims, or we can agree to a partial settlement that covers the principal withdrawals and forgoes the compound interest. He paused. The second option is faster and more certain. The first is more complete but may require years of enforcement and residual legal cost. Harry thought for a moment. What would you do? Ragnok looked at him with those level amber eyes. I would take the full claim with the long-form arrangement. Not because the money matters to Gringotts, we will collect our fee regardless, but because the ongoing legal presence keeps the Wizengamot's attention on the matter. A settled claim disappears. An ongoing enforcement process remains visible. He paused. It also prevents Dumbledore from considering the matter resolved and returning to normal operating capacity before the related proceedings are complete. Related proceedings, Harry said. Serious. Yes. How long? If Amelia Bones moves quickly, and I believe she will, a petition for formal trial could be filed within 2 weeks. The legal basis for challenging the original imprisonment is stronger now that the will is in evidence. The will establishes that Dumbledore had grounds to know of Sirius's guardianship status and did not act on it, which directly implicates the handling of the 1981 arrest. Ragnok folded his hands. The DMLE has jurisdiction over the trial petition. Gringotts does not, at that stage. But we can support the process by providing the relevant documentation from the estate records. Harry nodded slowly. Full claim. Long-form arrangement. And I want the DMLE document request filed today. It is already prepared, Ragnok said, and produced a folded parchment from his coat pocket. I anticipated your answer. He held it out. Your signature. Harry took the quill that materialized in Ragnok's other hand, signed, and handed it back. There is one more thing, Ragnok said, tucking the document away. The Potter properties. You are now the legal owner of the Edinburgh townhouse, the Wiltshire estate, and the Scottish property. The Wiltshire estate requires significant work before habitation. Several years of magical maintenance charms do not substitute for actual occupancy. But it is yours, and its title is clear. He paused. Godric's Hollow. The cottage was destroyed on the 31st of October, 1981. The land remains Potter property. The title passed to you automatically at your parents' deaths, but it has been in ministry care as they designated it a historical site. Harry was quiet for a moment. Can I get it back? Under the claims remedies, yes. The improper designation as a ministry historical site without the consent of the property owner is recoverable. We can have the title transferred within a month. Ragnok looked at him carefully. What you do with it is entirely your choice. Harry didn't answer immediately. He thought about a ruined cottage in a village in Somerset, a pile of rubble that people visited and left notes on the gate, a place that was everyone's history and somehow managed to be not quite his. He thought about what it would mean to own it. Not to rebuild it, not necessarily, but to own it. To have the choice. Yes, he said. Get it transferred. Ragnok inclined his head. It will be done. He looked at Harry for a moment longer, with an expression that was, in its way, warmer than anything Harry had seen from him in 2 days of working together. Gringotts has been waiting 14 years for a Potter to come of age with the capacity to use this instrument correctly. We anticipated you would be less prepared than you were. My mother prepared me, Harry said. Your mother gave you tools, Ragnok said. You decided to use them. That is different. He stepped back. The Remedy Commission meets Monday morning. I will send a carriage at 8. I expect this will take several weeks to fully resolve. The financial mechanics are complicated and Dumbledore's advocate will contest every step, which is their right. His voice had the dry, steady quality of someone describing weather patterns. None of it will change the fundamental outcome. The claim is upheld. The record is established. Everything else is arithmetic. He turned and walked back to his legal team without ceremony, and Harry watched him go with something that was close to affection, in the specifically Goblin way that affection operated, earned, practical, and requiring no acknowledgement. Outside the ministry, London was doing its bright, busy Friday thing. The pavement was crowded with ordinary Muggle lunchtime traffic, people with sandwiches and dogs and purposes that had nothing to do with ancient legal instruments or Wizengamot sessions, and the mundanity of it was briefly, intensely welcome. Harry stood on the pavement and let the city flow around him for a moment. Food, Ron said firmly, appearing at his elbow. Real food. Sit-down food. You have won a significant legal battle and you had half a piece of toast at 6 this morning and I have feelings about that. You have feelings about my breakfast. I have feelings about the fact that you are apparently going to sort your entire family inheritance and the most powerful wizard in Britain on half a piece of toast and sheer determination, yes. He was already moving, navigating the pavement with the ease of someone who had spent enough time in London to know where to go. There's a place Hermione found. Around the corner. Hermione had indeed found a place, a small Italian restaurant on a side street that was warm and unhurried and served enormous amounts of food without making a fuss about it. They took the corner table and ordered too much and talked for 2 hours in the scattered, wandering way of people who have been operating at high intensity for 3 days and need to let it decompress. Ron talked about his mother's second letter, which had arrived that morning and which had been, he said, completely mum about the whole thing, meaning it had been emotional and practical and fierce in equal measure, and had ended with a list of food she intended to send to the Edinburgh house. Hermione talked about the library on the second floor and the books she'd already identified as significant. She had a running list, naturally, and was clearly having to exercise restraint about how long she talked about it. Harry mostly listened. He ate more than he usually did, which surprised him slightly, and he let the conversation move where it moved, and he noticed, at some point in the second hour, that something he'd been carrying in his chest for most of his life had loosened. Not gone, things like that don't go, exactly, they just become a different shape, but loosened, like a knot that has been worked at long enough to have some give in it. He thought about his mother writing her letter on a Tuesday. He thought about her handwriting, which he now knew well enough to recognize. He thought about the word prepared and what it had meant to her, not afraid, not resigned, just practical and loving and determined that her son would have what he needed. He picked up his glass and looked at the afternoon light coming through the restaurant window and thought, I know what belongs to me now. That was the whole of it, really. That was what the last 3 days had been, not a war, not a single dramatic confrontation, but the quiet, methodical work of claiming what was already his. The money and the seat and the properties were significant, but the real thing, the thing underneath all of them, was simpler and heavier and had nothing to do with galleons. It was the knowledge. It was the right to know. His mother had understood that, at 21, scared and prepared, writing a letter she might never need to write. He thought he understood it now too. After lunch they walked back toward the ministry's Muggle entrance to retrieve a file Hermione had left with the Wizengamot clerk, and on the way, without planning to, they passed the alley where the Prophet's late edition was being loaded from a delivery cart. The headline was visible from the pavement. Wizengamot upholds Potter claim, Dumbledore faces full financial reckoning, will reading reveal suppressed guardianship. And below it, smaller, serious black case TOB reviewed, DMLE confirms formal trial petition. Ron stopped walking and read the headline twice. Serious, he said, and there was something in his voice that was very quiet and very certain. It's just a petition right now, Harry said. It has to go through the proper, Harry. Ron looked at him. He's going to get out. Harry looked at the headline. He thought about a lean, hollowed-out face in a photograph, a man who had spent 12 years in Azkaban for something he hadn't done, a will that had named him guardian lying folded in a vault while the world kept moving. He thought about what getting out would mean for Sirius, not just freedom in the physical sense, but the restoration of a name, a story, a version of events that was true. "Yeah," Harry said. "He is." The Edinburgh townhouse was warm when they got back, afternoon light coming through the tall Georgian windows at an angle that turned everything honey-colored. Griphook was at his desk in the ground-floor study, efficiently processing documents with the air of someone who had decided this was his office now and had reorganized it accordingly. Harry didn't argue with this. He went to the library on the second floor. Hermione had already been in here enough to pull several books and leave them in organized stacks, but most of the shelves were still as they'd been when they first arrived, Potter family books, for centuries of them, the accumulated reading of a family that had thought hard about magic. Harry ran his fingers along the spines without pulling anything out. He wasn't reading today. He just wanted to feel the room, the weight of what it contained. There was a desk in the corner by the window seat, old oak, built for the room, fitted with small brass fittings that had the look of things charmed rather than functional. He sat at it and looked out the window at the Edinburgh street below. The city was going about its Friday evening. A woman walked past with a carrier bag. Two students had a conversation on the corner, laughing about something. An old man walked a very old dog at the pace of the dog rather than the man. He heard Ron's voice from downstairs, a laugh, and then Hermione's voice answering, and the sound of something being moved in the kitchen. The house had the particular sound of people in it, which was different from the sound of a building. He'd known the sound of a building for most of his life. This was different. He thought about what Ragnok had said about the properties. The Wiltshire estate, Godric's Hollow. Edinburgh. The Scottish property he hadn't even looked at yet, beyond its entry in the registry, apparently about 400 acres, a loch, and a house that predated the current one by 100 years. He had no framework for any of it. He'd grown up in a box room in Surrey and a dormitory at school, and every concept of home he had was either very small or borrowed. He'd figure it out. He had decided, somewhere in the last 72 hours, that figuring it out was going to be his approach to most things, not in the vague hand-waving sense, but in the specific, methodical, do-the-actual-work sense that his mother had apparently also practiced. It felt like a thing he'd inherited, which was a new category of inheritance and the one that mattered most. He pulled a piece of parchment from the desk drawer. The drawer had parchment in it, and ink, and a quill with a tip that was slightly worn but still good, and he had a feeling this had been his father's desk originally, and his father had been someone who sat at it and wrote things. He set the parchment flat and picked up the quill. He wrote to Sirius. Not a strategy letter, not a legal briefing. Just a letter from a godson to a godfather who was still in Azkaban but was not going to be there much longer. He wrote it the way his mother had written to him, plainly, with the facts, but with the full weight of what the facts meant underneath them. He told him about the scroll. He told him about the will. He told him about the DMLE petition and what Amelia Bones had said and the timeline Ragnok was working toward. He told him about the Edinburgh house and that there was a room in it if he needed one, eventually, whenever eventually arrived. He ended it, "I know what they took from you. I know what they took from both of us. We're in the process of getting it back." He sealed it and set it on the corner of the desk for Griphook to arrange delivery through the Gringotts courier system, which bypassed ministry oversight entirely. Then he leaned back in the old oak chair and looked at the ceiling of the library, which had the same dark-beamed quality as the rest of the house, and let himself be still for a few minutes. He was 15 years old. He had a lawsuit in progress, a Wizengamot seat, 3 properties, several 100,000 galleons in accessible liquid assets, and a Goblin director who had apparently been waiting to champion his cause for 14 years. He had Hermione, who was in this very house building annotated reference binders he hadn't asked for and absolutely needed. He had Ron, who had chosen honesty over comfort when it mattered and was downstairs making tea because that was how he processed things. He had the memory of a woman at 21 writing a letter in October because she had decided to be prepared. He was not, he thought, in a bad position. He was also not done. This had never been the whole story, the claim, the session, the upheld verdict. That had been necessary, foundational, the establishment of ground that was actually his to stand on. But the ground itself was the beginning, not the end. Voldemort was still out there in whatever form out there currently meant. The Ministry under Fudge was still a compromised, anxious machine that would keep compromising and being anxious. The world hadn't fixed itself because a Wizengamot vote had gone 163 to 31. But Harry had something he hadn't had at the start of the week, something that turned out to matter more than he'd expected. He knew the difference, now, between the story he'd been given about his life and the life he actually had. He knew what belonged to him. He knew who had been making decisions about him and how and why. He could see the architecture of it clearly, the management, the careful incompleteness of the information he'd been given, the way his ignorance had been both a consequence of neglect and a condition that certain people required him to maintain. He didn't need to be angry about it anymore. Anger had its place. He'd felt it in the Gringotts conference room at 2 a.m, reading the withdrawal ledger by lamplight, but anger was a response to surprise, and he wasn't surprised anymore. He was informed, which was better. He heard footsteps on the stairs, and then Ron appeared in the library doorway with 2 mugs of tea, considered the room for a moment with the expression of someone trying to decide if they're interrupting something, and apparently decided they weren't. "You writing to Sirius?" he asked, looking at the sealed letter on the corner of the desk. "Yeah." Ron set one of the mugs down beside Harry and took the window seat, tucking his legs up under him in the way he did when he was settling in rather than passing through. He looked out the window at the street below for a moment. "Dad wrote," he said. He was in the chamber, not the session. He doesn't have a seat, but apparently word got around the ministry fast and he spent all of yesterday and this morning having awkward conversations with colleagues who are adjusting their view of things. "Is he all right?" "He's fine. He's kind of relieved, I think." He knew something was off about some of it and there wasn't anything to do with the knowing. Ron wrapped both hands around his mug. "He asked if you'd be willing to sit down with him at some point." "Not officially. Just, he wants to say something, I think, and he's dad about it so he'd rather do it in person than write it." "Yeah," Harry said. "Of course." Ron nodded. A comfortable quiet settled, the kind that belongs to friendship that has been tested and held. Through the floor they could hear Hermione on the landing below, talking to herself slightly in the way she did when she was working through something, and the sound was so ordinary and so completely right that Harry felt something ease further in his chest. "What happens next?" Ron asked. Not anxiously. Just curious, in the steady way of someone who had decided they were in for whatever came. "Remedy commission on Monday. Sirius's trial petition in the next few weeks if Bones moves fast. The actual financial settlement will take months, probably." Harry picked up his tea. "And Hogwarts in September." Ron raised an eyebrow. "You're going back." "I'm going back." Harry said it simply. I have a life there. Friends. Quidditch." He paused. "And Dumbledore's still headmaster. The claim addressed what he did with my assets and my legal status. It didn't remove him. And he's still the most knowledgeable person on Voldemort's situation that I have access to, even if the access is going to be different now." He looked out the window. "I'm not done needing information. I'm just done accepting the version of it I'm given without checking it against everything else." "He'll be different," Ron said. "At school. He'll have to be." "I know." Harry thought about Dumbledore in the Wizengamot chamber, looking at his hands. He thought about the doorstep conversation in Edinburgh, the calculation moving behind the blue eyes. He's not going to stop thinking he was right about the big picture. But he's going to have to think differently about me. He paused. "Good." They heard Hermione on the stairs, and then she appeared in the doorway with her notebook and an expression that suggested she'd had a productive hour. She looked at the two of them, Harry at the desk, Ron in the window seat, the tea, the letter on the corner, the library around them with its centuries of accumulated books, and her expression did something complicated and warm. "The Potter Library has 6 books that Hogwarts' restricted section doesn't have," she said. "And at least 3 that the Hogwarts Library has been listing as missing since 1974. She came in and sat cross-legged on the floor, notebook open, entirely at home. "I think someone borrowed them and never returned them." "I wonder who," Ron said. "I have a theory," Hermione said. "It involves the fact that several of them are advanced transfiguration texts and one is a comprehensive study of animagus transformation that would have been very useful to a group of 4 students at Hogwarts in the early 1970s. Harry looked at the shelves with new attention. "My dad. And his friends," Hermione said. "I think they borrowed them and planned to return them and then everything happened and nobody," she stopped. "Anyway. They're here now." Harry stood up and walked to the shelves and looked at the spines until he found the animagus text, brown leather, the title stamped in faded gold. He pulled it out. Inside the front cover, in handwriting he didn't recognize but that had the confident slant of a teenager who thought well of themselves, property of James P. And under it, in different handwriting, adding itself to the record, and Remus L., who will actually read it. And under that, cramped into the margin, and Sirius B., who will read it eventually, probably, when James explains the diagrams. Harry stood in the library of a house that was his, holding a book that had been borrowed before he was born and never returned, and laughed, not at anything in particular, just at the shape of things, at the way his father's voice had come off a page of a 50-year-old textbook with the specific, recognizable personality of someone who had never quite believed rules applied to him, and had apparently passed that quality on, and it had been sitting on this shelf waiting to be found. He put the book under his arm. "I'm keeping this one," he said. "Obviously," said Hermione. He put the animagus text on the desk next to the letter to Sirius and went to sit back down, and they stayed in the library for the rest of the evening while Edinburgh settled into Friday night around them, the lights coming on in the street below, the sound of the city's easy evening traffic, the smell of the old house breathing around them. Griphook collected the letter to Sirius at some point and the door downstairs opened and closed with his characteristic precise economy. The tea went cold and was remade. At some point, without anyone announcing it, the conversation drifted from legal strategies and Wizengamot politics to other things, Quidditch rosters, a book Hermione was reading, something that had happened at Diagon Alley last summer that Ron had been saving to tell and decided now was the right time. The shift was natural and necessary, the way a conversation has to eventually stop being about the important thing and become about the ordinary things, because the ordinary things are also the important thing, just quieter. Harry was, he thought, hungry for the ordinary things. He'd spent 4 years in situations that were not ordinary and had accepted not ordinary as the condition of his existence. He was starting to think that had been an error, not the situations, which had been genuinely unavoidable, but the acceptance of not ordinary as default. Normal things happen too. Libraries and tea and your friends' voices and the specific funny thing your father had written in the margin of a borrowed book. Those were available. He was going to start collecting them. He had Vault 3. He had the Edinburgh house and the Wiltshire estate and the Scottish property with the lock. He had the Wizengamot seat and the signet ring that had warmed to his hand in the space of an afternoon and seemed, improbably, to already feel like his. He had a Gringotts legal claim in progress and a serious black trial petition heading toward the DMLE and the full documentary record of 14 years of decisions that other people had made about his life now entered into the official record where it could not be edited or buried or lost. He had Ragnok, who had been waiting across 14 years with professional patience and was now moving with the efficient momentum of an institution that had gotten what it wanted and intended to make the most of it. He had his mother's letter in the desk drawer. He'd transferred it from the folio on Thursday afternoon and wasn't sure he'd give it anywhere else to live. He had her handwriting, her voice in it, the smell of something old and clean from the trunk in the attic that had been waiting under cardboard and a rolled-up mat for the right night. He had a fight still ahead. Voldemort was real and alive and growing, and the Ministry was afraid and incompetent, and Hogwarts in September was going to be the beginning of a different and harder year than any that had come before. He knew this and didn't push it away, because the thing about clarity was that it worked for all of it, not just the good parts, but the entire picture. He looked at the ring on his hand in the lamplight. The stag moved in the stone. He thought about Dumbledore, not with anger now but with something more like sad precision, a man who had been very powerful and very certain for a very long time, who had arranged the world into a shape that suited his understanding of what was necessary, and who had met, this week, a version of his ward that did not fit the shape he prepared. Harry did not wish him ill. He wished him accountable, which was a different thing, and more durable. Whatever Dumbledore did next, with Hogwarts, with the Order, with Voldemort's growing return, he would do it knowing that the 15-year-old he'd managed for 14 years had stopped being manageable. Harry thought the old man had understood this on the Edinburgh doorstep, standing in the streetlight with the calculation running behind his eyes. Had understood that the era of useful, ignorant, grateful Harry Potter was finished, and that the shape of things going forward was going to require a different kind of relationship, one with an actual person in it, rather than a role. That was Dumbledore's problem to solve. Harry had his own work. He picked up the quill again and started a new piece of parchment, notes for the Remedy Commission on Monday, questions he wanted to raise with Ragnok, a list of the items in the Potter library that needed cataloguing. He wrote for 20 minutes while Ron and Hermione's conversation moved around him like weather, easy and present. Then he stopped and looked at what he'd written, and below the list he wrote, almost without deciding to, a single line, figure out what comes next. He looked at it for a moment. Then he added, on your own terms. He capped the ink, set the quill down, and looked out the library window at the Edinburgh night, the lit windows of the houses opposite, the warm amber of the street lamps, the stars that you could almost but not quite see through the city's soft glow. Somewhere under London, in a vault that was now entirely his, the Potter family's accumulated 4 centuries of history sat in the deep quiet of Gringotts' care. Somewhere in Azkaban, Sirius Black was one petition closer to a morning that was coming. Somewhere in Hogwarts, in the headmaster's office, an old man was sitting with what he knew and what the world now knew and working out what to do with the distance between them. And here, in a house that smelled like old stone and his father's books, a 15-year-old who had been raised to be small sat at a desk that was his and wrote his own plans down. He turned to a fresh page. He started with the properties. He moved to the Wizengamot. He made notes about the things he still needed to understand, the political landscape, the structure of the ancient and noble houses, the treaty framework that gave Gringotts its authority. He made notes about Sirius, what the trial would need, what it would prove, what it would mean. He was thorough and specific and didn't hurry, because he had time now. Not unlimited time, the world was going to keep requiring things of him, hard things, things he hadn't asked for, but time that was his to structure. Time that wasn't someone else's schedule being handed to him and called protection. Ron fell asleep in the window seat at some point, which he did with the reliability of a very large friendly animal and the total lack of self-consciousness about it that Harry had always found comforting. Hermione kept working. She would work until she was genuinely tired, which usually meant midnight, occasionally muttering something to herself about a reference she'd found. The fire in the library grate that Griphook had lit burned down to embers and then was quiet. Harry worked until he was done, and then he put his notes in order and capped the ink and sat back in the chair. The library was warm and quiet around him. His friends were in it, doing friend-shaped things, asleep in a window seat, reading by firelight. His father's books were on the shelves. His mother's letter was in the drawer. He was 15 and the world was going to be difficult and he had no illusions about how difficult, not anymore. But he was going to meet it as himself, which was the only way worth meeting anything. He stood, stretched, and went to make the tea.